Teisha Bader, and in the news, the visit of U.S. President Joe Biden to Israel, which appears to have been significant and historic in a number of ways. Biden met with Israeli Prime Minister Yair Lapid, President Isaac Herzog, and others. He signed a declaration reaffirming the security commitment of the United States to Israel, which specifically mentions Iran. He was presented the Presidential Medal of Honor by Herzog. His visit also bringing with it reportedly a chance at possible normalization with Saudi Arabia, where he headed after Israel. And he was even on hand to kick off the 21st Maccabiah Games in Jerusalem, the first U.S. president to be present at the Games. So what did the Biden visit do or not do for the U.S.-Israel relationship, for issues that the two countries perhaps don't completely see eye to eye on, and for the future of U.S.-Israel ties and others in the region? Well, to help us answer this question, offering his perspective and decades of experience is Ambassador Dani Ayalon. Dani served as Israel's ambassador to the U.S. from 2002 to 2006. He is a former member of Israel's Knesset and served as Israel's deputy foreign minister and played a leading role in peace negotiations regarding the Israeli-Palestinian conflict in the early 2000s. Dani, thank you so much for joining us here on JBS.
My pleasure, Teisha.
Thank you. So Dani, you have a wealth of experience in the U.S.-Israel dynamic, in relations between a number of presidents and Israeli prime ministers. What do you think the tone of this visit was, and how do you see it in the significance of that history?
Okay, Teisha, well, I would say that by definition, any and every presidential visit, American president visit in the United States, is a major event, is of strategic importance because it elevates Israel's status in the region and beyond, and certainly helps and emboldens, I would say, Israeli deterrence against any foes, because also the optics in this visit shows that the bond between Israel and the United States, Teisha, which is a very natural one. The alliance between our two countries is natural because the two countries are like-minded in terms of ideology, believing in democracy, freedom, of course, freedom of speech and everything else. And we share the same strategic interests. We have the same allies. We have the same enemies that are trying to hurt us. So all this together puts it in a very, very specific context, whereby foes should beware and allies should rejoice, I would say. And in this, with this, I would say that the visit after Jerusalem in Jeddah certainly helped a new defense architecture in a region against Iran mostly, but also against radical terror of radical Islamic terrorism like ISIS and Al-Qaeda. Both Iran, the Ayatollahs of Iran, and the terrorists from Al-Qaeda or ISIS, for that matter, Hezbollah, which are just in bed, of course, with Iran, and Hamas. All of them have their objective to bring down not only Israel, but also the moderate regimes of the Sunni countries in the region, starting with Saudi Arabia, all the way down to the to Morocco on the northern Africa. So it was ceremonial, it was festive, but it also had concrete content and substantive issues that were discussed. You mentioned, Teisha, the Jerusalem Declaration, whereby Israel and the United States will never allow Iran to be nuclear. And what was missing from Israel's point of view was to put a credible military threat to Iran by the United States. The United States did not go as far at this point, but I think the road is quite paved that in case that Iran does not come back to the table for the agreement, for signing an agreement on actually curbing and stopping its illegal nuclear activities, then of course we will have to revisit the issue. But meanwhile, a lot of concrete measures of coordination between the militaries was discussed, and especially what is called the Middle East air defense, which will actually combine together Israel capabilities with those of Saudi Arabia and the Gulf countries in terms of intelligence, deterrence, and if needed, interception of any incoming ballistic missiles from Iran.
So let's talk about Iran for a moment and the Jerusalem Declaration, as you mentioned, which also spoke about, in general, the U.S. commitment to Israel's security. But certainly, and I think from what you're saying, the intention of it was most likely a statement against Iran. Am I right?
Absolutely. You see, at this point, these are the Iranians whose intransigence and actually belligerence is the one preventing an agreement. From Israel's point of view, even the agreement that maybe the United States is ready to sign is not good enough. It's not stronger and it's not longer than the JCPOA, the former agreement with Iran that was signed during Obama's administration in 2015. But even that very weak agreement is not acceptable by Iran, which in a way may, I would say, tilt the balance. So more countries, not just in the region, every country in the region, especially the Arab countries, understand the threat from Iran. But it is important to put a credible military threat, because the Iranians, the Ayatollahs, they yield and respond only to credible threats. And we have the proof. The historic proof is that in 2003, it was the first time that, and so far the only time, that the Iranians voluntarily suspended all its illegal nuclear activities. Why? Because it was flanked on both sides by the United States military in Iraq, on their Iraqi border and on their Afghani border, and they stopped it. So we need to put this military threat, and Iran may try or always overplay its cards, and here maybe the United States and NATO will understand that only by military threat we will stop Iran, which is a very, very dangerous country.
Well, it's interesting, Donnie, because the differences between the U.S. and Israel stance sometimes seem small. For example, President Biden did say in an interview with, I think it was Israel's Channel 12 News the day before he arrived, it was aired the night he got to Israel, when the reporter, I think it was Yonit Levy, asked him if the U.S. would ever use force in Iran, and he said, as a last resort, yes. So he
Absolutely.
did say that, but you're saying it wasn't put in writing, and that is because Lapid was also, again, speaking, diplomacy is not enough, and Biden was saying, I think diplomacy can work, but it seems obvious that the U.S. is saying until a certain point they would use diplomacy, that they would consider military force, again, as a last resort. So you're saying that's not a strong enough position, that it should be in writing somewhere now for Iran to get the message now, since this situation is just ramping up as we speak?
Well, it is a work in progress. Yes, it is good that these things were said. It's not enough just to have it on verbal, state, but also in writing. And I believe that the United States reserves, of course, all options, and it will react to Iranians' position. Unfortunately, at this point, the key to an agreement with Iran is in Tehran. So the Iranians at will can decide to sign what is now on the table for them, which for Israel is not enough, or they can continue to breach all their international obligations and not sign, and this will necessitate a new decision, a decisive declaration by Washington, but coupled and augmented by steps on the ground.
And I want to talk a bit about Prime Minister Lapid, who is new in his position, just a few weeks. I wonder if you think that the visit of President Biden would have looked any differently if Naftali Bennett was still the prime minister? Did it change the dynamic at all? Did it change the tone of the visit at all?
No, the short answer to this question, Teisha, is no, because really the U.S.-Israel very, very firm special relationship extends beyond personalities. And it really doesn't matter almost who occupies the Oval Office in the White House or the Prime Minister's office in Jerusalem. The interests are the ones that I would say dictate the visit and the agenda on the visits and the developments at the time. And of course, the long and deep alliance and the shared values. So in that respect, it is really a people-to-people's a bond. It's not just a relationship between governments. And here we are, Israel, of course, we're very glad that grassroots America mostly supports Israel. And this is manifested, of course, in Congress, both in the Senate and the House of Representatives, in the administration, and also in many non-governmental organizations, be it evangelical Christians, Jewish, some Hispanic, I would say also industry and the tech community. There is a great close connection between Israel tech and American tech communities. So all this together is really a tapestry that really puts our two nations very much together. And this is irrespective of who are the leaders in either side of the ocean.
That's such a good point. What was lovely, though, is Biden has a history with Israel. This was his 10th visit, which is quite remarkable. And he referred several times to the first time he was in Israel in 1973 and met Golda Meir, who was then prime minister, and met Yitzhak Rabin, and the impact that had on him. And that was just a lovely sort of personal connection that was highlighted several times throughout the visit.
Oh, he is a remarkable and warm person. I had the privilege of knowing and meeting him when I was in Washington, and he was then a senator at the Foreign Affairs Committee. So we had a lot of business together. He has always been very kind, very supportive, really seeing the world from the same outlook that we do here. He calls himself still a Zionist. And he said, you don't have to be a Jew to be a Zionist, and I truly believe that. And he made a special gesture at the Yad Vashem with two survivors from the Holocaust. And you could see how he relates to them, how he really deeply feels. He has deep feelings for the Jewish people. I just hope that he is not the last Mohicans of Democrat leaders and politicians, because we see new generations that do not have the same depth of understanding and of the importance of Israel to the United States and vice versa. And we need that. Unfortunately, we see among the Democrats, although of course the mainstream Democrats are very much pro-Israel, but there is a small but very noisy, vociferous, progressive element that I'm not sure understand the interest and is really ignorant of the historic relations and the importance for the two countries to continue them.
Let me ask you about that, Donnie, because I think you're referring to certain members of the squad, as they are known, who have been very vocal in their anti-Israel sentiments. Do you feel that there is any room, that there is any space to have a dialogue with these members of Congress to say, we'd like you to come to Israel. We would like you to have an opportunity to dialogue with Israeli leaders, with Jews, with Arabs, with Palestinians. Do you think there's any room for that kind of a conversation, or is it past that point, in your opinion?
Well, I would love to have a dialogue, but a serious dialogue without any bias, without any preconditions. If those members, as you mentioned, of the squad, call Israel an apartheid state and call for boycotting Israel without even understanding the basic elements of the conflict here, and not really relating to all the inequities of the Palestinians, who are, I say, the major perpetrators here of not just the terror and incitement and propaganda against Israel, but also they are the ones who blocked every time peace initiatives and peace overtures by Israel. If those members of the squad will come here, without any, I would say, prejudice, I would welcome this very much. And I would also call for the majority, the silent majority of Democrats, including the Jewish Democrats, that should not remain silent when these are blatant lies spewed by these members of the squad. Again, I hope it's just out of ignorance and not of something else more nefarious, like anti-Zionism or anti-Semitism. But they should not be unanswered, whatever they accuse Israel.
So let's talk about the Palestinians for a moment and Biden's visit. And Biden, of course, we know, met with PA President Mahmoud Abbas. They met in Bethlehem. And Biden then, when he went to Saudi Arabia, the Hamas launched several rockets at Israel. What do you make of how the Palestinians see Biden's visit, and how Abbas sees it? And certainly Hamas, with sending rockets, we understand that they were not pleased with the visit of the president to Israel and the West Bank. How do you see the Palestinians in this whole equation?
Well, the Palestinians feel, and rightly so, that they came out empty-handed with this visit because they were expecting a lot. They expected the United States to reopen the consulate, American consulate in Jerusalem, which would be actually in violation of the U.S. Congress resolution of recognizing Jerusalem as Israel's capital and moving, with the former administration moving the American embassy to Jerusalem. They also wanted all kinds of, I would say, benefits and political support. But how can you really support what is a terroristic entity? At this point, it's not just Hamas. Hamas is obviously a terror organization, but also Abu Mazen and the Palestinian Authority. They are paying millions, tens of millions of dollars to terrorists and members of Palestinian terrorists who killed Israelis, actually giving them more encouragement to kill. They are the ones who are trying to take Israel to International Court of Justice for crimes that they are responsible for. So, and they are not recognizing the legitimacy of the Jewish state. They still teach in their curriculum in schools from first grade and on that Israel is a pariah state, has no roots, should not be here, and that the Palestinians should actually take out the entire land. The BDS movement is not just criticizing Israeli policies. It's legitimate to criticize anybody's policies, but to undermine the very existence of the state. When they call the BDS and also the Palestinians, what do they call? To free Palestine, as if there was ever a free Palestine or a Palestinian state. But they call to free Palestine, and listen to that, Teisha, from the river to the sea. That means from the Jordan River all the way to the Mediterranean, which means the entire landmass where Israel is. So they're not ready for concessions and compromises and the two-state solutions that we were actually accepting too many times in the past. And for that reason, they should not and cannot expect American support. American diplomacy in the region has always been for decency, for truth, and of course for stability and prosperity, which can come about only if the Palestinians will renounce terrorism and will start actively fight against terrorism.
And having said that, Danny, I'm just going to ask that, there are signs here and there, it seems, in the news that there are also positive aspects of the Israeli-Palestinian relationship. Defense Minister Benny Gantz recently met with Abbas I think it's the third time in the last year or something. We do see security coordination here and there. I'm assuming there are also, excuse me, I'm assuming there are also things that we don't hear about. Given everything you said, which is factual, do you see any possibility, though, of still, at this point, let's say in the next several years, working towards a two-state solution, seeing if there is a common ground that can be found? Let's say the Palestinians said, okay, we're going to stop paying the salaries to the terrorists and we need Israel to do X, Y, Z. Is there room for that? Again, is there room for that kind of dialogue, do you see, in the near future?
There is always room for dialogue. There's no dialogue with terrorists who are there to kill you. You cannot negotiate with anyone who wants to kill you. And what do you negotiate about? The terms of the killing? Of course not. But certainly in the long term, I would like to see a new and reformed Palestinian leadership, which is doing away with the rhetoric, with the incitement of the past, and also with the support of terrorism. In that sense, I'm not opposing our Minister of Defense meeting with Abu Mazen, because it has a purpose to actually increase the security coordination between Israel and the Palestinian Authority against a common enemy. As much as the Palestinian Authority is a real sworn enemy of Israel, and I would say the Jewish people, we still have a common enemy, Israel and the Palestinian Authority, which is Hamas, which is this radical, uncompromising, unyielding, radical Muslim group supported by Iran, of course. They are out to oust the Palestinian Authority from the entire Judea and Samaria, West Bank, Ramallah, just as they did in 2007 in Gaza. They took over in a coup Gaza, and they would like to do it also in Judea and Samaria. Of course, Israel cannot allow that. We saw what happens in Gaza when they actually built it as a launching pad of rockets against Israel. We cannot afford it if it was also coming from the Ramallah area, Judea and Samaria area, actually having the entire country at their mercy. And Abu Mazen himself also, he would like to cling to power. He would like to cling to life, because this is what the Hamas people do to their enemies. They just kill them. So there is a common interest here, and maybe, Teisha, this is what is my hope, that within this common interest, which is right now quite tenuous and narrow, but maybe out of this, more and more cooperation will grow on other issues, on economic and civil issues, culture, and maybe by that time, we will have a better attitude where the Palestinians do accept Israel's right to be here in our own homeland. And if this is the case, Israel is ready for far-reaching concessions vis-a-vis the Palestinians.
Well, it's interesting that you put it in those terms, because getting back to Biden's visit and him going to Saudi Arabia, which I want to ask you about in a moment, the normalization agreements that Israel has made with several Arab countries, with the UAE, with Bahrain, with Morocco, and you talk about this common enemy, and in that situation, it's, it seems to be more about Iran, but that can open a door, as you said, to cooperation, to agreements that perhaps we wouldn't have imagined 10, 20, 30 years ago. So maybe there is some way towards that with the Palestinians as well.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I am very optimistic. I believe just as we saw change of hearts in Saudi Arabia, which is the largest and the most important Arab country, towards Israel. Also as a result of the Biden's visit, we have overflights now. Israeli airliners can fly over Saudi Arabia airspace. In a few months, we will have direct flights from Ben Gurion Airport to Jeddah and Riyadh for Israeli Muslims, Arabs who want to do the pilgrimage in the Hajj in Mecca. These are baby steps, but certainly they pave the road for a much larger normalization agreement, as we do have now with many Arab countries. It was Egypt to begin with, and then Jordan. Now we have full peace with Bahrain, with the United Arab Emirates, with Morocco. Sudan is coming also to full normalizations, and the Saudis also are a few steps behind. But again, the common interest of security in the region against Iran bind us all together. But it's not only that. I think more importantly is a common destiny and a common future. You see, we live in an area, well, in the world, I would say, that the main challenges for future generations would be food security, water availability, affordable energy. In all these areas, Israel is a leading technological power, and we are very much willing to share this technology and this know-how with our new friends in the region. So this is also another pillar that puts together this new alliance in a good shape.
And hopefully all of this, it seems, since it started up until now, that it's a ripple effect, that things open up, that there are new opportunities that are mutually beneficial for both countries, for Israel and for whichever Arab country you're speaking of, that then people can see the positivity, the validation of normalizing with Israel, and hopefully this continues to ripple and spread further.
Absolutely, and this is, what we have to give credit to Trump. I know he's very controversial, but one thing he did understand: the realities in the Middle East. He did understand that all former presidents were trying, and they did their best to try to bring about peace in the Middle East. But their concept was, first and foremost, you have to crack the Palestinian-Israeli conflict. And this is the only condition for the larger peace. What Trump said, no, we cannot just go from the center, which is hard to crack, to the periphery, but we'll do it the other way around. We'll go from the periphery to the center. So first and foremost, we'll have peace with those countries, which is easier to make peace with, and maybe they will persuade the Palestinians, who will come last.
Danny, thank you so much, as always, for sharing your experience, your perspective. It's always so interesting and so helpful, and we appreciate your time tremendously.
Thank you very much, Teisha. We'll see you soon, hopefully.
I hope so. Danny Ayalon is former ambassador from Israel to the United States. We thank him so much for his time here on JBS. And thank you, as always, to our director, Sloan Copeland, managing director, Dara Golub, technical manager, Michael Paley, transmissions manager, John McDevitt, and to our producer, Carol Lilienthal. And thank you for watching In the News. Be well.